Merry Christmas, brothers. Thanks so much, everybody in the chat, for joining us today. We've got a really good show. It's a Christmas special. We're going to have some fun debunking evolutionism. We all know that it's a philosophy that they're trying to hide hide in science and say is a science, but we know that it's easily refutable. That's what we're going to do today. It's the knockout punch to Pond Scum to People Evolution. We got some good people here. We got Praise I Am That I Am. Thanks for joining, brother. We've got Jeremy. We've got Nephilim Free. So we're going to have some fun here. We're going to jump right into it then. We've just posted recently one of the best debates that we think occurred in 2019. It was our brother Nephilim Free here taking on Jackson Weed and James Downard, big time critics of creation. So that was a great debate, 2-on-1 Lion's Den, I call it, and Neff did great, refuted all their points. And they really had no arguments. There's a few things that jumped out at me, actually, that we can get into later about neutral mutations. Neff made some great points about how natural selection can't see these unselectables, right? They have such a tiny effect on fitness that natural selection can't see them. They build up in the population. I remember Jackson Weed denying that. He said, oh no, natural selection can see many of them, which is actually not true. Natural selection can only rid the population of the worst deleterious mutations and amplify the best beneficial mutations. But as Neff pointed out brilliantly, they can't do anything. Natural selection can't do anything about those low impact, invisible, essentially, mutations to natural selection, right? They're slightly deleterious, kind of like rust on a car. So I thought that he was a science denier, denying that fact. His only rebuttal was laughter, science denialism, and scoffing at John Sanford. So I do want to get into ALUs and retrotransposons next, but that kind of jumped out at me. What do you think about that, Neff?
How about geology?
Oh, Neff, are you there, brother?
Okay, sorry about that. Repeat. What did I think about what? I'm sorry, I was reading something.
I noticed Jackson Wheat when you brought up how these near neutral, the low impact deleterious mutations, how they're so subtle, they're invisible to natural selection, that natural selection can't see the majority of mutations, so they build up slowly
to
generate our information systems. He denied that. And you even asked him, what's the percentage, roughly, of mutations that natural selection can see? And he wouldn't give an answer. He refused to give an answer. And his only rebuttal was laughter, scoffing at John Sanford, and not really giving any rebuttal at all.
Well, the simple fact is this. Evolutionists, when they talk about mutations, they overlook something that's critically important, and that is that it's been discovered that the information sequences in DNA are overlapping and nested, because the DNA information is highly compressed. You have software programs like WinRAR or 7-Zip, whatnot, and you can zip files, and you can take 10 files that are a megabyte each and zip them into a zip file and then share that with somebody, and that zip file might be less than 10 megabytes. It'd be 9 or something, because it compresses the information by sharing bits of data between files, right? Well, the same thing is what the genome is doing. Genomes possess information that's overlapping and nested. Because of that, if you have, say, a mutation that replaces a base pair in the DNA, the chances are that that base pair is part of more than one sequence of information at the same time. So they're only talking about the DNA as though it were just purely linear information, like a ticker tape written out in a book, sentence one after another, and you never go back and use any of the bits of data in the previous sentence. But that's not how the information in DNA is written. Sentences are shared words and letters in the DNA molecule. So when you have a mutation that damages one sequence, there's a high chance that it's damaging at least one more sequence, and in some cases could be damaging as many as dozens of more sequences at the same time. That's compound damage. So natural selection just isn't going to see all that. It just doesn't. Even secular scientists have published that natural selection just doesn't see the typical mutation. They're silent, right? So the reason evolutionists who debate us say that that's not true, that the typical mutation causes damage, it's because, one, they refuse to accept that mutation is a damage event, not a designer. right? That's obvious. And then the other is, but they don't want to face the fact that DNA is compressed information, because if that is true, then it's obvious that mutations cause compound damage, and natural selection just isn't seeing most of it. So it really boils down to their ridiculous belief that that genetic mutations are designers. They just will come up with any scenario necessary to avoid the fact that it's simply an established fact that mutations are destroyers.
That's right. That's right. I always say mutations are the destroyer, not the creator. And like you said, Neff, it's overlapping. It's multifunctional. I mean, the entire genome is now being shown to be functional, complex, and engineered beyond our wildest dreams. So like you said, any small change, given the fact that the genome is now polyfunctional, right? And it's also polyconstrained. So the smallest little change may not seem to have an overall effect on, say, phenotype, but on the genotype at a microscopic level, it's going to have a small effect, kind of like a single spelling mistake in a book the size of an encyclopedia. And guess what? Natural selection is not going to see that. Those are going to build up. And it's funny because I had a comment today from another science denialist who was watching one of my debates with T-Jump, where I covered genetic entropy, and T-Jump obviously didn't have any rebuttal to it. And this commenter, this evolutionist commenter, denied genetic entropy, right? He said no serious biologist believes in genetic entropy. And I said, are you crazy? Any serious population geneticist agrees and knows that man is presently degenerating. That's why they come up with these artificial mechanisms, Neff, synergistic epistasis, mutation count mechanism, you name it. That's why they're coming up with these artificially contrived mechanisms to explain away this problem of genome degradation. So these evolutionists don't even understand the science itself.
And right, they're fighting against science. They're in denial of the fact that for 90 years, almost 90 years, all these million-plus studies in genetics have proven that mutation is a destroyer. They can't accept that because their paradigm requires that mutation is the designer, and they can't get on with the science. They have to deny it.
That's right. That's right. And I find it amazing because I've been preparing for a debate with this so-called human evolution expert. She debated Ken Hovind recently on human evolution. And genetic entropy goes right back to the so-called human ancestors, because now with all this incoming data, those so-called, primitive humans are now shown to be inbred subpopulations, right? Post-flood, post-Babel, because that's what happens, right? These subpopulations migrate. Let's say Homo naledi, Homo erectus, for example, the hobbits, Homo neanderthal, inbreeding, right? Fast, rapid genetic degeneration. All of a sudden, you've got these features that they see and point to as primitive. No, these are just degenerated human beings. They're not so-called evolutionary ancestors. Then you look at the Australopithecines that are nothing more than ape. So there's this huge gap that they still have. They'll point to a couple like Homo habilis and Australopithecus sediba, which are nothing more than a wastebasket of random fossils that if they find a fossil or a bone in the ground, they don't know what to do with it. So they just throw it into this ghost taxa, But at the end of the day, human evolution has no evidence. Everything that we see in the fossil record proves extinction and genetic degeneration, all consistent with a biblical base model. Like they've got nothing left, Beth.
That's well, they never. Go ahead, Jeremy.
Standing for truth, may I add a little thing about the function that you are talking about?
Of course. Hey, take as much time as you need, brother.
It's just short. You forgot something. Don't forget that ENCODE only tested not they did English. They did not test all cell types. They only tested 20 to 30%, if I'm not mistaken, and those already reveal function.
That's right. That's right.
So imagine if we tested all of them. then your argument becomes stronger, standing for truth.
That's a phenomenal point, because we understand so little of the DNA language. And just like you said, a lot of this evidence, it's preliminary. We've just begun to discover just how functional the human genome is. So, Jeremy, I mean, it's mind-boggling how many experiments we'd actually or would be required to conclude with any real level of confidence that, let's say, a certain set of DNA sequences has absolutely no function. I mean, we're just beginning to understand the DNA language, but it comes down to the trajectory, like you were saying, and the trajectory favors genome-wide functionality. I mean, this goes for pseudogenes. This goes for, actually, this is a good way to move into the ALUs, the retro transposons, because I noticed RJ Downard, and he says this in his streams too, that he's always asking creationists about retro transposons and endogenous retroviruses and these jumping genes, and how do we explain them? Were they originally in Adam and Eve? And it's such an easy answer. And for one, the question that the evolutionist needs to ask is, what are retro transposons, right? Are they the leftover remnants of these viral infections in our genome? And I want to say, before I continue, Neff gave a phenomenal answer to RJ Downard, but he kept repeating himself. And what we now see is that these retro transposons, these ALUs, they're created units of DNA function. But what did evolutionists assume for years? That they were evolutionary leftovers, junk, parasites. And the only reason they think that they think they're remnants of viral infections, is because they bear these strong similarities to actual viruses. And then what do they predict, Neff? They predict that they're non-functional, but we know they're functional beyond belief.
Oh, absolutely. Let's answer a question somebody asked. A fellow, Tom Hank, asked a question in the chat. He says, Standing for Truth was in a debate between Erica with Eric, I'm not sure what he means by that. Erica and Kent Hovind. Erica said that if DNA similarity works for paternity tests, why doesn't it work for common ancestry? Well, let me give you my views on that real quick, and then Standing for Truth will answer for himself. Here's an interesting thing. Those paternity tests are based on mitochondrial DNA, not genomic DNA, for one thing. And the phylogeny of evolutionists is based on genomic DNA, completely different DNA. Okay, so in the mitochondria of the cell is a small piece of DNA. It's called mitochondrial. It's very much small. It's tiny, in fact, compared to the genomic DNA, which is the entire DNA molecule. The mitochondrial DNA is a small piece of very critical information that's used for specific purposes, especially for cytotaxis and for cell reproduction, cell duplication, where cells divide and such. And it has markers that certain things will change about it. The genetic information will change over time, and it creates markers. And those markers are used for paternity tests. And that's what is so strong about being able to prove that so-and-so is the father or mother of a particular child. But the phylogenetics of evolutionists is based on similarities between genomic DNAs, the entire DNA molecule, and they do all kinds of crazy things before they begin to examine the DNA of one species and another and compare them, and then claim that the genetic similarities between them show common ancestry. But if you examine that subject deeper, you'll find that it doesn't support the idea of common ancestry. And there's a lot to be said about that. For example, any giant blocks of DNA that seems exactly the same or duplicated or reversed or whatnot between a human and chimpanzee genome, they just eliminate those, don't they, Standing for Truth? They cut them out. Then they start, and then they start comparing genomic similarities, and it's very specious the way they do their and ALU repeats. They tend to ignore a lot about ALU repeats, for example, and so there's a lot about the genomic, the entire DNA, that shows that there is not common ancestry. And I'll just say this, and then I'll give Standing for Truth, I'll ask him to give his thoughts about it. But there are incredible discrepancies in their phylogenetics, their similarities between one species and another when it comes to DNA that they never tell you about. They don't like talking about it because that is problems for them, and they overlook which is typical of evolutionists. They don't talk about all the things that argue against their theory. They only talk about things, and they twist things in such a way to make it look like their theory is so well supported. What they're not telling you is all the problems that they have with their phylogenetics. Isn't that right? Standing for truth.
Well, that's absolutely right. And I think when you look, for one, when they look at the similarities, genetically with humans and chimpanzees, you're absolutely right. I mean, for one, it's selective treatment of data, right? They cherry pick the data because, like you said, there's so much that they don't actually include. You named it, right? They tend to ignore a lot of the ALU repeats, the redundancy. They don't include the non-aligned DNA. They don't account for the size differences, the gaps, for example. I mean, we can go on. And that's why, Dr. Tompkins, for example, after his analysis, he's concluded that, the genetic identity is only about 88%. Or even lower, but that's that's 400 million DNA differences that actually separate chimpanzees and human beings, and not to mention the Y chromosome. I mean, the Y chromosome is less than 70% similar. Every single human male chromosome, Y chromosome on the planet is incredibly similar, 99% similar, even higher. But then chimpanzees and humans, who are supposed to share a common ancestor recently, roughly 6 million years ago, is less than 70% similar. How does the evolutionist explain that one?
Exactly. And let me share this a little bit with you. Carl Weiss, the scientist who discovered the third domain of life, archaea, has said this. In 1998, he said this, and I quote him: "No consistent organismal phylogeny has emerged from the many individual protein phylogenies so far produced." In other words, nothing is consistent, he's saying.
Right.
And that was back in 1998. Now, when you point out something like that, the evolutionist says, "Oh man, that's old science, 1998, are you kidding?" As if they didn't do good science in 1998. Please, with that already. So there are many, many, many incongruencies in the phylogenetics. Here's another one. Let me give you this one more, and then I don't want to hog the mic, but I would give this. In a recent scientific paper published in PLOS, a peer-reviewed journal titled "An Estimation of Enricidae Phylogeny, a Combined Analysis Approach," they state this: "Incongruencies across different data sets is not a novel observation within the mammalia phylogenetic analysis. Therefore, as a final test, we performed 3 combined analyses with the expected expectation of morphological data, etc., blah, blah, blah." These are the important words. The first ones, he said: "Incongruencies across different data sets is not a novel observation within mammalian phylogenetic analysis." It's not novel. In other words, it's commonplace for them to find incongruencies when comparing the genome of one mammal with another mammal, because these incongruencies are pervasive. They're throughout every species that they compare the DNA to, and say, like, for example, they say, let's examine the DNA of, let's say, a beaver, and let's see how that compares to a bear, and how close they are genetically. They find incongruencies, things that don't work for their evolution theory. They don't talk about that, but they'll admit that in their papers because they have to, because their peers are reading these papers. And if they didn't make these admissions, their peers would raise an eyebrow and say, "What? Is this guy nuts? What kind of scientist is he?" Right? So they have to be absolutely honest when they're dealing with their peers, but what they tell the general public is a different story, isn't it?
May I again add a little number or a little support to what Standing for Truth just said about the Y chromosome?
Of course, brother. You can jump in anytime. Take your time, Jeremy.
Yes. You already explained the basics. No, sorry, the basics and the complex. I would just like to add a little number, because the human and the chimp came from the gorilla, right? They say we di we di we
We
are the
diverged.
species we are the species that came out of the gorilla. Now, they say that was about 6 to 7 million years ago. Okay, so that is, like you said, that is not enough time for English. Uh, the huge dissimilarity today of the Y chromosome and the divergence of the human and the chimp in their model predicts that there should be huge dissimilarity, right? But
Right.
the 6 million figure that they gave between the human and the chimp should be about 50, about 20 to 50 million years ago. That's how far back they have uh, to. Can you help me with my English?
They have to push it that far back. Yeah.
Yeah. They have to push it far back, uh, about 20 to 50 million years. That is my own calculation. So those evolutionists can try to attack me. It's okay. That's my calculation. And with that data, um, uh, that's it. So there's a huge this is a puzzle for them. They
There's a
have
big
to solve
a
this.
gap. There's a
And
gap. There's a big
yeah,
gap.
yeah, and if they have to uh what was the word again? They have to move the timeline. Yeah, if they have to move the timeline 20 or 50 million years ago, it screws up their entire timeline, and
Right.
they that alone can debunk. Not alone, but it's a good evidence that can really support the fact that we that I think that's it. Is it understandable?
Yes, it is. That's a
Yes,
good
it is
point,
very.
Jeremy.
It's a great
It's a
point.
good point, and evolutionists do this all the time. They'll adjust the timeline of evolution to fit the theory constantly, and that's what you're pointing out. And that's a good point. If something doesn't match the evolution theory, like two creatures seem to have been, for example, according to the fossil record, they find that two creatures coexisted. Well, then they just push the evolution timeline backwards. No problem. That's
Exactly.
how we fix it. So
Right.
you're exactly right, Jeremy. They do that all the time. They always adjust the evolution theory like sliders on a scale, and they think that fixes it because, as we all know, the theory can't possibly ever be wrong. So they just adjust the theory, and it's never proven wrong.
And and that's why even these Australopithecines. I remember watching Bill Ludlow's debate with Hovind, and Bill Ludlow said, if we can find any evidence that man lived with the Australopithecines in the fossil record, that would falsify human evolution. Well, guess what? There's an abundant evidence that man coexisted with Australopithecine, all the Australopithecines, whether it's Afarensis or Africanus. They just recently found, and I think it was 2017, an anatomically modern-looking footprint in the same layers as Australopithecus afarensis. I mean, according to Bill Ludlow, that falsifies his theory. I guess they're just going to have to push it back even further. Secondly, I wanted to make one last point about the Y chromosome. The Y chromosome, another fatal blow with that is that the Y chromosome should actually be the most similar to the chimp Y chromosome because of the low level of recombination and DNA sequence diversity on the Y chromosome. It's very stable, it's very static, but yet it's 70% dissimilar to the human Y chromosome. You know, there's literally no explanation they can have other than maybe gene conversion or I guess accelerated mutation accumulation or something. But I mean, they're not going to make any testable predictions on it, that's for certain, because it's more of a rescue device. So there's 2 fatal blows just on the Y chromosome to evolution, and yet there's one single Y chromosome male ancestor in our genetics, just like the mitochondrial DNA is very similar worldwide, which points us right back to one female ancestor, not to mention the fact that every single human being is incredibly similar, which points to low genetic diversity, which points to Adam and Eve. And then what do the evolutionists come up with? Well, the evolutionary bottleneck hypothesis that happened 200,000 years ago, right? This extended and near extinction event. One last point before I hand it off to Neff. I've covered this in so many debates. In my last 2 debates with Adam Friended and Jordan, the nuclear engineer, I asked him, I said, how is this even feasible, this so-called bottleneck? Because that bottleneck would be associated with severe inbreeding. Therefore, it's not even remotely feasible because the genetic damage, this so-called population at 10,000 would have gone extinct, not evolved into modern man. It's not scientific. It's a fairy tale.
Right. And so what they're pointing to is the Noahic flood, and they can't see it. So the evidence is simply showing that all life experienced a genetic bottleneck at some point in the past. They think 200,000 years ago, you know, when it was really 43 or 400 years ago.
Exactly.
And so the glaring thing is they're seeing a genetic bottleneck for all the various kinds of life. And you could have you could have somebody who believes this and a university professor, for example, and say, so it looks like there was a giant bottleneck for everything. And they'll say, yeah, because a meteor hit the Earth. And you could say to them, no, because there was a Noahic flood. And leave him, just walk away from him. And I guarantee he's going to be left scratching his head like, how in the heck did that guy just align the Bible with everything I've been thinking about like that? You know, because it's going to blow his mind. Because they can't see the forest for the trees. You know, it's right there in front of them. There was a massive bottleneck for all life on this planet. Right. But they can't see that it was the flood of Noah because that just can't be true in their mind. It just couldn't have happened. And now, how they get the 200 million years, that's a long story. I mean, 200,000 years, that's a long story. They've always got their ideas. You have to understand, these people can't possibly, they can't, absolutely cannot conceive the Earth could be less than hundreds of millions of years. At the time, absolutely is necessary because they believe evolution. And so you have to have the hundreds of millions of years time for this to happen. So the idea that the flood of Noah is the explanation for the bottleneck is just unfathomable to these people's minds. Their minds are so locked in this idea that the Earth is billions of years old and everything has evolved over vast ages of unimaginable time, right?
They've got wild imaginations there now.
Right, exactly.
Well, one point on that, what's funny is, like you said, so to explain the evidence for, one male ancestor looking at the Y chromosome and one mitochondrial DNA ancestor looking at the mitochondrial DNA, which actually, if you look at observed mutation rates and calculate that backwards, takes us right back to, 6,400 years, just as the Bible says. But to explain away that evidence plus the low genetic diversity, like you said, they resort to a bottleneck 200,000 years ago, right? The population bottleneck. But what's funny is this hypothetical population, Neff, supposedly stayed, at the near extinction level for a prolonged period of time. It wasn't just a one-generation bottleneck like Adam and Eve, and then explosive population growth, and then a one-generation bottleneck at the time of Noah after the flood, and then explosive population growth. No, this was a prolonged near extinction event. But we all know, anybody with basic science, scientific knowledge knows that results in a severe severe fixation of bad mutations and severe inbreeding depression. So, and then all of a sudden, supposedly that same population somehow evolved into Homo erectus and then into modern man and went into unbelievable exponential growth. No. This hypothetical population would have been so genetically damaged, it would have went extinct. There's no evidence for this bottleneck, but it's just a story to explain away the evidence for Adam and Eve. That's it.
Well, it really is.
Sorry.
No, go for it. Go for it, Jeremy.
I just like to complete what Standing for Truth was talking about. You talk about Y chromosome, correct?
That's right, brother. Yeah.
Did you talk about mtDNA also?
Just kind of touched on it, the fact that, all mitochondrial DNA worldwide is incredibly similar, and based on observed mutation rates, take that back to one mitochondrial Eve ancestor 6,300 years ago. But other than that, I didn't touch on any more. Did you want to expand on it and add to that, Jeremy?
And not really that. I mean, did you talk about it in this video? Sorry, I forgot. I just want to complete. You talk about the Y. There's also the X chromosome.
Right. Yeah. Actually, you know what? Expand on that. That's a really good piece of evidence too, Jeremy.
It's just simple, actually. Let me start with Mrs. Noah. We don't know the name of Noah's wife, so we call her Mrs. Noah. Mrs. Noah will pass her X chromosome to, if you know genetics, very well, you would know what I mean. Okay, an atheist can try to dispute this, and I don't know if they are smart enough to even dispute this. Mrs. Noah would have passed her X chromosome to her 3 sons, correct? Now that would result in, if you know genetics very well, it would result in 7 X chromosomes for us, for world populations worldwide. Okay, 7.
7.
6. Sorry. Did you say something?
No, you said 7 chromosomes?
Yeah, 7 chromosomes.
7 examples?
7 chromosomes in world populations today. If Noah's wife pass on her X chromosome to her 3 sons. Okay, now for Mr. Noah, let's assume for a while, because there are 2 theories here. First one is 3 mitochondrial DNA, which Standing for Truth talks about a lot. Okay, and some evolutionists have attacked this by saying there's another haplogroup discovered which fits with the LMN, or from Dr. Carter's data, it's MNR. So Dr. Jensen and Dr. Carter's evidence are different but almost the same. But very different. But I'm assuming I'm using the sample of LMN from Standing for Truth and Dr. Nathaniel Jensen. So let's assume that Noah had Mrs. Noah and Mrs. forgot the English. Let's assume that Mrs. Noah had another child. Okay, I have had another girl baby after the flood. Okay, the X chromosome that we would expect today would be about 8, 9, or 10. Okay, and this will increase genetic diversity. This would correct, Mrs. Noah, producing the girl baby. Okay, because like I said a while ago, evolutionists say that there could be another. Standing for Truth said LMN, right? 3. So evolutionists said there could be another one, very closely similar to LMN, their genetic difference. Okay, so there could be another letter there. Okay, but actually, yeah, there could be another letter. But we can dispute it. They can also prove it. We can also dispute it. So
Yeah.
this is our research that has to be finished. Actually, this is a
Well-
testable. This this is this is also a testable prediction. If Mrs. No, if sorry, if yes,
No,
you were.
go ahead. Go
I
ahead.
thought you were trying to say something.
No, go ahead.
If Mrs. Noah produced another baby girl after the flood, then we solved the problem that the evolutionists give, LMN, correct? Now, to follow up on the X chromosome, wait, I forgot the evidence. To follow up with the X chromosome, so that means Noah, now, this time, Mr. Noah, would produce, because of the new baby, the new baby girl, the sibling of the three what do you call that, sons of Noah, and then those three girls that they married, and then Mrs. Noah produced another baby. Um, from Noah's X chromosome this time, Noah, huh? A while ago it was Mrs. Noah, now from Noah. He would then add up to the X chromosome. So if Mrs. Noah had another baby uh, after the flood, girl baby, it has to be a girl baby, baby girl. Sorry. Uh,
And she-
um,
yeah.
I'm really struggling with my
So,
English.
so that would mess up their theory. Is that what you're trying to say?
What I'm trying to say is this is a testable and falsifiable prediction that we are working on, because evolutionists love to say we don't make testable and falsifiable predictions. So I'm giving them one, and other than the testable and falsifiable prediction, with this new baby, with this new baby of Mrs. Noah, okay, and then that would add to the X chromosome to 8, 9, or 10. Okay, more or less. Because before it was 6, 7, 8. Now it could be 8 or 9, 8, 9, or 10, depending on the mutation. Okay.
So,
we
can I
would,
ask you a question?
we
How
would
did you come up with 7 mitochondrial DNAs from Noah and his wife and their 3 sons?
wait. It's
Three-
too
and 3 wives.
technical because wait. I forgot how the details, honestly, but it's 7 and 9. Okay, I'm lost the specific details, but it's also in the evolutionary literature.
Well,
Okay.
wait a minute. Okay. Well, wait. So we've
Wait.
got Noah's 3 daughters-in-law, right? Who pass on their
X,
That's 3. Noah's
3.
wife makes 4.
No, because chromosome X, they have two X chromosomes, right? Those girls.
right. Yeah, XX instead of XY.
So we have a more or less of 7, right? If you add them all up,
Okay,
correct?
2 for each woman. That would
Yeah.
make 8.
And if Noah had if Mrs. Noah had another baby, then 8, 9, or 10, correct?
Well, depending on if she had a son or a daughter, right?
No. She has to have a daughter, not son.
Right. To pass.
But there's
Okay.
only one mitochondrial
That's
DNA
excess.
per woman, though.
As much excess as possible, the better for our model. Okay, so even if it's a male, it's okay. But if it's a female, it's much better. Okay.
Right.
So,
Okay. So even with a female, that's just another
that's
X
just
chromosome to be passed on.
yeah. Okay. And this would really, and with this number of chromosomes, that would really create a huge genetic diversity today, or the X, and that's what we find. Okay, but this is not yet sure. This is preliminary evidence. So
Okay. So
atheists,
you're saying that this would be consistent with the X chromosome diversity that we see today.
yes, preliminary evidence. We predict that this genetic diversity would be a lot more than it is right now, because
Well, it would still fit, even if it was just Noah, because we know that there's three main mitochondrial DNA haplogroups. So let's say L, M, and N. But even if it was just Noah's three daughters-in-law passing on their X chromosomes, that would still be consistent, though, with the X chromosome diversity. But you're saying if Noah's wife also had a daughter, that would just be even better.
even if she had yeah, that would even be better. So 6, 7, 8, or 9. That's our figure, our predicted figure, and the genetic
Well,
diversity.
that'd be chromosomes, not mitochondrial DNA. I point that out.
Yeah,
Right.
Chromosomes, not
The chromosome.
mitochondrial DNA.
sorry. Yeah. So I just want to complete everything. We have the Y, which standing for truth, gave the evidence, and we have the mtDNA evidence, and now we have the X. We have everything.
So we've got the Y chromosome, we've got the X chromosome, and we've got the mitochondrial DNA.
All saying
all
what do you call that? Converging or
Right.
or corroborating each other. Or supporting each other.
Right, and that corroborates the Bible, because God's word says that Noah, his wife, their three sons and their three wives were on the ark, and those were the only human beings that survived the Noahic flood, and that's 8 people. And so and one of the problems with the secular camp's ideas about these human genetics divergence is that they believe, man came out of Africa, right? Evolved as Homo sapiens out of Africa.
Right.
But one of the great problems for their idea is that the genetic diversity of African peoples, and there are numerous African tribes, numerous. I mean, there's like hundreds of different specialized African tribes of people. The problem is that there is greater genetic diversity amongst Africans than the Europeans and the Slavs and the Asians that came allegedly after man came out of Africa. So if their out of Africa theory were correct, the greatest genetic diversity of mankind should be found not in African people, but in the Germanic peoples, the Slavic peoples, the Polynesian peoples, the Asian peoples, the Hindu peoples, all these various tribes of mankind that came into being after that, that's where we should see the greatest genetic divergence and variation. But the problem is this: that's the opposite of their theory. The truth is they've discovered that the greatest genetic diversity is amongst African people. That's the opposite of the theory. The theory would predict that after they came out of Africa, then genetic diversity would explode, right? But what they have found is the greatest genetic diversity exists amongst Africans and not amongst all the tribes of mankind that allegedly were produced after mankind out of Africa. And the reason for that is because the people who are all the African tribes of mankind were, according to their theory, and this is something they don't like to talk about, are allegedly closer to the earliest human beings, the pre-human hominids, and the human Homo sapiens that came out of Africa. So according to evolution theory, and this is where you can start talking about the racism of evolution theory, it's built right in this. So what you see is that it doesn't match their theory. If their theory were true and African tribes were closer to the earliest humans and to, in fact, the earliest pre-humans, the hominids, which is what their theory predicts, then African people should have lower genetic diversity than all the tribes of mankind that came into being after man allegedly migrated out of Africa. But the opposite of that is the truth. African people have greater genetic diversity amongst them between the various tribes than all the other tribes of mankind. And evolutionists today are left scratching their heads about this. They can't figure this out because it doesn't fit their theory. It's the absolute opposite of their theory.
Can I just very quick, very quick. I'm sorry for interrupting.
No, take your
Okay?
time, Jeremy.
Just very,
No,
very
you're
quick.
not interrupting.
Because you were okay. You were right about the tribes. But are you sorry? May I ask you again? Are you talking about the entire tribe of Africa? Uh, the diversity of the entire all the tribes of Africa,
All the
uh,
tribes of Africa combined, the diversity, the
the world.
genetic variation between the DNA, the between all the various tribes, and there are numerous tribes of people in Africa. The genetic diversity between all of them is greater than the genetic diversity between, say, Celtic peoples, Slavic peoples, Germanic peoples, Nordic peoples, which are Germanic, by the way,
Uh,
Polynesian people, Asian people, the Chinese people, the Japanese people, the Korean people, all all of those various tribes of people above Africa have lower genetic variation between them than in Africa. And that's the
so
opposite of what their theory predicts.
so just one tribe, Nephilim, just one tribe alone can account for the entire European continent. Correct?
Well, that's
Just
not
one tribe.
apparently what
Just one tribe.
happened, though, because scriptures tell us, and as genetics points out, that Shem, Japhet, and Ham are the basis for all the tribes of mankind, most notably Japhet and Shem. The Semitic peoples were the offspring of Shem, Shemites, thus Semitic, and Japhet. I could go into that for extensively. The European peoples and some of the Asian peoples are the product of Japhet's genes. Ham produced both peoples that live in Asia and Africa. So the African people are the offspring of Ham, and some Asian tribes are also the offspring of Ham. So, but all the European tribes are the offspring of Japhet, and European and Asian peoples and Eurasian peoples are the offspring of, and Mid-Eastern people are the offspring of Shem, mostly Mid-Eastern people. So, but that doesn't match their theory. But it matches genetics, but it doesn't match their theory, and they just
Uh,
pretend they can't see it.
may I not Nephilim to standing for truth? Since we're talking about this issue, do you want to talk about the L0 thing? The cheating thing of the L0. Do you want to add that to corroborate everything Nephilim Free said? You said
Are you?
if you want, do you want? It's up to you, because you know this is a little bit complex.
Of course, yeah.
Uh,
If you want to touch on that, Jeremy, go ahead, brother. I've
I
talked
or
about
you?
it. Yeah,
Do
you
you
can.
want?
No, I've
I,
talked about it. I've talked about it 1,000 times, almost every debate I have. You can
Yeah,
go ahead
Standing
and
for
melt it.
Truth goes on and on about this, and he's right, and he provides astonishing evidence about this. The Bible
uh,
is correct when it comes to the genetic diversity of man, and the evolution theory doesn't comport with either science or the biblical account, which does comport with the
Right.
genetic evidence. The Bible is verified by the genetic information. As you know, Jeremy, go ahead and give us your thoughts about it, brother.
Yeah, go ahead.
guys, I'm talking about something different here. No offense. I'm sorry. And standing for truth, I don't think you used this in your debate yet.
Are you talking about the L haplogroup? You talk about L0, right?
Yeah, L0. Did you told them about the L0 cheating thing?
I believe so. You take your time, expand on it, brother. Give us your thoughts.
Okay, the evolutionary L0 is their mitochondrial Eve. Okay, that's based on a worldview. The evolutionary L0 can also be our biblical Eve. Okay,
Right.
if we change worldview. Now, the evolutionary L0, as we know, are more or less in South Africa. Okay, now the question is, if the center of genetic diversity is in North Africa, okay, that's where all people started according to evolutions out of Africa scenario. Now, wait, my English. To be specific, the center of genetic diversity is in Ethiopia, but it is still in North. It is still in North Africa, where
Right, and you're saying that would be the hub of genetic diversity.
Ethiopia for now. Okay, for now. Future research will push it to the Middle East. And don't forget, Ethiopia is one river is the Red is one Red Sea. The Red Sea is one Red Sea away from Saudi Arabia. One Red Sea away from Saudi Arabia, which is already the Middle East. Now, regarding the L0, did you know why those atheists put it in South Africa? Because they cannot put it in the real center of genetic diversity, which is in North Africa and in Ethiopia, because it is too close to the Middle East and too close to the Tower of Babel. So that is what I call cheating. Okay, don't forget mitochondrial DNA. We all started there. L0 from there, from L1, L2, L3, like that, and the L3 is the LMN. Okay, so sorry guys, do you have any questions? Do you get it? So L0 should not be below Africa. Should not be somewhere south, somewhere below the middle of Africa. It should be either in Ethiopia, which is close to the Middle East, and they are in big trouble if they put it there, because that is the Tower of Babel already, the story of the Tower of Babel. So they cannot put it in Ethiopia, which is so close to Saudi Arabia already, and that's the Middle East, Tower of Babel. So they cannot put it there, so they cheat. They put it below. They put the L0 down there at South Africa. And then where are the L1, L2, L3 after the L0? Where is it? And then when they're comfortable putting it on their L0 on South Africa, then they are finally now comfortable to put the element at the center of genetic diversity and get rid of the problem of the L0. Okay, so that's cheating. That is why L0 is below Africa. This is a trade secret among evolutionists.
Well, it's like you said, they're cheating because they have to explain away the evidence.
The L0 must be at North Africa or Ethiopia.
It can't be in the Middle East. It can't be in the Middle East for them.
No, yeah, it can be in the. It cannot even be close to the Middle East.
Right. So they want to keep it as far away as possible.
Yeah, it has to be at the center of genetic diversity, North Africa or Ethiopia. Okay, which is too close for comfort for them. Okay.
That's right.
So yes, that's it.
Well, it's amazing because it's all too close for comfort for them, right? The low genetic diversity, which points back to Adam and Eve, the 1Y male ancestor lineage that points right back to obviously Adam, the mitochondrial DNA, the X chromosome, the 3 major haplogroups. And I love it because as I was debating Dr. Stefan Frello, who's really one of the only ones who's actually addressed the LMN haplogroups and the predictions that it makes and the predictions that flow from it. He tried to say, as you know, Jeremy, and you kind of just debunked it by showing that there is significant evidence that the hub of genetic diversity is in or close to the Middle East. But he would say that
not in the Middle East, North Africa and Ethiopia. Okay,
yes,
and they're
in Africa, right?
Yeah. And their L0 has to be put in North Africa or Ethiopia, but it's not.
Right.
They cannot do that because L0 is where we all came from. Okay, so L0 is where we all came from, and it has to match with where the hub of genetic diversity is.
The astonishing fact about it all,
Ethiopia. So I am supporting what Nephilim Free said.
Right.
Right. The astonishing fact of it is that the Bible gives us a genealogy in the Table of Nations, and it tells us literally where people moved and what their names were. I mean, consider.
It's amazing. Yeah, it's amazing.
Yeah, it's amazing. And these people say this is not human history. I mean, really, think about it. I mean, it's a joke.
We can trace it back with genealogies, like you're saying. We can take it back with genetics.
We can trace it by name. We can use etymology. Look, the Bible tells us that one of the sons of Shem was named Elam. Gee, just happens one of the earliest empires of the earth were the Elamites. Now, it also says that one of the offspring of Shem was Ashur. Gee, it just happens that the Ashurians or Assyrians were one of the earliest empires of the earth. Go figure. It just happens that the Bible says that Ham migrated down into Egypt. It just happens to be that the oldest historical record we have from an ancient historian for the name of the land that is called Egypt today was Hamia, and their god was Hamet. Just happens that Ham migrated there. Derp. I mean, you can do this over and over and over, right? And they just say, I can't see that. That doesn't exist. I mean, please. These people are so blinded by their paradigm that they can't see the trees for the forest.
Okay, let me
and not to mention one point, the fact that, genetics, and just like you said, you can literally point to exact names, these genealogies, everything in the Bible about the history of humanity, the history of the earth. It lines up perfectly with empirical science.
It does. Let me make an empirical statement here. The names of the men in the book of Genesis who are the offspring of Noah and their children and their children's children. In other words, the children and grandchildren of Noah. I can even show the great-grandchildren and great-great-grandchildren of Noah are involved in this as well. But I'm just going to stick with this. The children of Noah and their children happen to be, etymologically, the very names of the earliest cultures and tribes and empires on the planet, according to secular archaeology. Now, what is the chance that if the Bible is not the Word of God and it's not true, that that's just going to happen to line up? Right. The odds are none. These people see this, and you know what offends me so much is that you can go to secular university and learn about the history of mankind, and they will not discuss one iota of this evidence. And this evidence is massive. It's massive, and it's recorded by numerous ancient historians, and even secular scientists, archaeologists find names, rivers named after so-and-so, cities named after so-and-so in the table of nations in the Bible. And these people absolutely, completely ignore this. And here's the offensive part. They won't put one shred of it in your curriculum. Not one shred.
No, they won't. Did you want to say something, Jeremy? I know you were about to say something earlier.
Just a little thing to support the LMN. Very fast. Very, very fast.
Take your time.
Yeah. In the world, we see the LMN, right? Your LMN, or Dr. Carter's MNR. Depends. Doesn't matter.
Right.
But here's the fact. In every continent, in every part of the world, we find 3 main lines of mitochondria.
Right.
Yeah, that's it.
Yeah.
It's not only contained in Africa. When they migrated, okay. If I can show you the migration pattern, you'll get those atheists will get it more, and they will still ignore the evidence. I almost said the F word. Sorry. They won't care. Evolutionists know there are 3 main lines. Not only in Africa. In Africa they will dispute it. We've heard it before, standing for truth.
Well,
We
you
can
know what?
also defeat it.
All the evidence suggests it's nowhere. It's not a out of Africa theory. It's been destroyed. It is a out of Middle East theory, an out of Middle East model. That's what the genetics points to. That's what pretty much everything points to. And that's exactly what we would predict and expect if the Bible and Genesis was true. And
Let me make it stronger. Let me make that argument stronger. In the world, like I said, if those
Right.
atheists did not pay attention, we find everywhere 3 lines of mtDNA,
right.
not only contained in Africa. Okay, can those atheists please explain that? And if we found another letter, which you also, which atheists, some atheists might, smarter atheists might say, which is the baby of Mrs. Noah after the flood, then even so, there could be 4 too. It's flexible. Our model is flexible. So the LMN that's standing for truth keeps on using in debates. Is not only in Africa.
Well, remember their argument though. Dr. Stephan Frello said M and N come from L. So how did they all live at the exact same time? How many times have you heard that one, Jeremy?
I mean, the fact that there are 3 mitochondrial lines, not only in Africa, but on the entire Earth.
In the entire Earth, right?
Whatever they say about the whatever Frello said about the LMN, if you get what I mean. Why are there only 3? The worldwide.
Worldwide, yeah. Have them explain that. And what I find amazing too is you'll tell this to the atheist, they won't have any rebuttal, but then you'll tell this to somebody like a theistic evolutionist who says that they believe in the Bible, and it's like, hey, listen, Genesis tells us we came from 2 people. What would we expect? Low genetic diversity. That's exactly what we see. We'd expect to find evidence in the Y chromosome, in the X chromosome. We'd expect to find this in DNA, mitochondrial DNA haplogroups. And this is everything that we find. And it's like, here's the Bible you claim to believe in. And they reject the evidence. And you'll find, like, for example, biologos, right? Theistic evolutionists, they'll talk about how, there's no way in 6,000 years, and this argument, Jeremy, we've talked about this a lot. There's no way. So they're rejecting all this evidence here, and they're talking about the genetic diversity. Where did it come from? Because they look to and they assume that all DNA differences are the result of mutations, as you know, Jeremy. And they'll say to generate that much diversity through mutations in 6,500 years, that's impossible. But Jeremy, as you know, they assume that all DNA differences, all genetic diversity is the result of mutations. No. The big difference between our view and the evolutionist view is that what? We explain and can explain based on empirical science that the vast, vast majority of nuclear DNA differences are not the result of mutation, but they're the result of pre-existing or created diversity. And guess what? That one genetic difference between us and the evolutionists and the theistic evolutionists has huge implications for the timing as to the origin of species. And as you know, we've made a ton of predictions. We wouldn't need millions of years to generate the diversity because we're not looking to just mutations to explain the diversity. If the differences are there from the start, the simple operation of recombination and gene conversion, and of course some other processes, will produce visible variety in a single generation. That destroys their main best argument. I hear it all the time. RJ Downard uses it. All your top evolutionists use it. Seen it in a comment today. But guess what? Their rebuttal to that is it's ad hoc. You can't assume pre-existing DNA variety, pre-existing heterozygosity. Well, for one, they do. They assume inherited DNA differences in their model according to human evolutionary history.
Right, but it can't be those describes that match up what the Bible says. That can't be right.
Yeah, exactly. I can't, and they'll say, "Oh no, that's an ad hoc explanation." No. We've made a prediction. If these are all created DNA differences from the start, we would expect these DNA differences then to be functional, not evolutionary leftovers, junk,
Right.
for example, that the evolutionists predict. And what do we find, Neff? As you know, over 80% of the DNA, for example, is transcribed into RNA. That suggests function. That's preliminary, but there's
Right.
so much data. The trajectory suggests genome-wide functionality,
Right.
evidence for design, just as we've predicted.
You're
Exactly.
forgetting
86%.
you're forgetting the cell types, standing for truth.
But it's preliminary.
That's
I
very
understand
crucial
that.
also.
Right,
Okay.
I understand they only tested a few cell types, but that's why that really, because evolutionists will say, oh, you don't make future testable predictions. Here's a testable prediction. The more genome sequencing we do, knockout experiments, for example, in the future, we will find more and more that the genome is functional. We had a question in the chat about endogenous retroviruses. Well, at the end of the day, the evidence suggests that those are functional DNA elements. The chromosome 2, for example, that's been overturned. That entire junk DNA paradigm has been overturned. I mean, the so-called fusion is now known to be located in a functional gene. I mean, these predictions come true more and more every day. And then, you've got these evolutionists like Tony Reed.
Oh,
right?
Tony. You know what? Standing for truth, when I debated Tony, you know what he said? He said this ridiculous thing. I don't remember what it was, but he said some guy much later than Ono invented. Was it not? I can't remember exactly. I think he said Niles Eldridge or somebody later than that.
Right. Yeah.
And came up with this idea of junk DNA. I mean,
all I could do is laugh.
I mean, Ono invented that term 2 decades before that guy.
Right.
I mean, get your facts right. I mean,
they're trying to rewrite history. They're trying to rewrite history.
Exactly. They can't. You see, the reason he wants to believe that, first off, he may have been, received false information. But what's the basis for this false information that the junk DNA paradigm came into being in the 1970s, as Tony
I know exactly.
The idea is that it has to be a new idea, the newer. You remember I said the evolutionists, when they find incongruencies in their theory, the way they attempt to fix them is by pushing the slider further into the past, never towards the front, because that would be compressing time towards special creation. They can't do that. So what they do is they move the slider towards the back, extending time. And this is how the age of the Earth has gone from, 500,000 years old to 1 million to 1 billion to 5 billion or to, this is how they do that. And they do the same thing with evolution theory. So instead of moving it towards the front, they always stretch time out into the past, right? So, but when it comes to ideas that seem to refute evolution theory, they want to push those to the front as though that was a more recent claim than in the past, because they don't want it to be understood that evolutionists have so long put forth this false idea and that it was an antiquated idea. You see my point? Right. That it was an antiquated idea born in a day, say for example, in the 1960s, scientists knew relatively little about genetics, almost nothing. Really.
Almost nothing.
Yeah. Almost nothing. And in the 1960s. In the 1970s, the DNA genetic information exploded. And they started learning a lot about DNA in the 1970s. 1980s, even more knowledge. 1990s, whoa, knowledge, it really exploded about genetics in the 1990s. And it's just increased since then. So, Tony wants you to believe that this idea of junk DNA was a relatively recent false claim because he doesn't want you to see that the claims of evolutionists are antiquated, outdated, made long before modern science discovered all this information that discredits them. See, they don't want it to look like an antiquated, outdated idea. So Tony made this false claim that the term junk DNA was coined in the 1970s, but it was not. It was coined long before that by a Japanese geneticist, Ono, over 10 years before that. So Tony was being disingenuous about science and providing false information when he claimed that the junk DNA term, idea, was coined much later in the late 70s. I think it was mid 70s. Then it was actually coined over a decade before that by a Japanese geneticist named Ono. So this just demonstrates that the scientific lack of integrity when it comes to evolutionists, because they're willing to misrepresent facts about the history of science in order to try to defend their theory.
Guys, I think we have discussed so much genetics already, so technical already. I think that we have debunked a lot of what they said, and we have reviewed the debate between Neff and the whoever atheist he is. I also had Standing for Truth showed me another debate the other day or 2 days ago, whatever, about his debate. Was it your debate, Standing for Truth, about the flood?
But yeah, that's right. That was with Jordan, the nuclear engineer. If you wanted to get into flood geology, that's a great idea, Jeremy.
No, I'm just asking you guys because we reviewed Neff's genetic debate. Now,
well, we didn't review it, but we've been talking about genetics. But Standing for Truth did a fantastic job in that debate, as he always does in his debates. He rocks, and because he's a well-informed creationist like the rest of us, and he has no problem refuting these evolutionists because he sticks to science and what's actually observable, testable, repeatable, and the inference given by the data. But the evolutionists, they refuse the inference given by the data, and so of course he did an excellent job in that debate.
Well, and I find it amazing, before we move on to, I guess, a different topic other than genetics, I always say, they want to point to fossils. They want to point to what they believe is, transitional, or they want to point to these bones found in the dirt. But guess what? Fossils, bones found in the dirt, rocks, right? They'll look to radioisotope dating. These things are not inherited sperm and egg. They're not inherited genetically. Traits are, genetics are, genes are. And guess what? This is what we're looking to in the present, using empirical observational evidence to prove the validity of the biblical-based model. We can make predictions in genetics. They're coming true more and more every day. And then, like you said with Tony Reed, they're rewriting history. And that's why, because T-Jump tried to use the same thing. And I always ask the same question. Well, how much of the genome then, non-coding DNA and protein coding, do you believe is functional? And they won't answer the question, but the evolutionary scientists will admit it can't be any more than 20-25% functional. Well, guess what? They're trying to say they never predicted junk DNA. They just admitted junk DNA. If they don't believe any more than 25% functional or 20% functional, they're saying that 80% is junk. That's ridiculous. So they want to rewrite history, but then when you ask them the right question, they admit most of it's junk anyways. Guess what? That entire junk paradigm's overturned.
Absolutely junk ideas. Junk ideas. Evolution is junk ideas in a junk paradigm. It's not science. So junk DNA, no, tell them no, it's not junk DNA, it's junk evolution.
Junk evolution. They've got junk imaginations. Their science is junk. The perfect word to describe them is junk. That's right, Neff. You.
I think I coined it, man. It's junk evolution. That's a new term. You credit it to me. If you repeat it, you promise me. Neff said it first.
A percentage of all proceeds are going to you, Neff. Don't worry, brother.
All right, I get rich.
What were you going to say, Jeremy? What were you going to say?
Was it you who debated about the flood or Kent Hovind?
Well, Kent Hovind had a few debates on the flood recently.
With that nuclear engineer guy you said? Was it you or Kent Hovind who debate?
Well, if it's Jordan that you're referring to, the nuclear engineer, I debated him, Rob, Matt, and I, and then also Kent debated him recently. Kent really got him.
Yeah, the recent debate. Then Neff had the recent debate, right? And we reviewed it. Are we also going to review the recent debate between Hovind or you? You or Hovind? Sorry, so I forgot.
Well, there's been so many debates, Jeremy. There was one between a fella named Emotionally Stunted Emoticon. We've all debated him, and we've all refuted him. But he debated Hovind a little while ago, and you and I, we reviewed that because Emotionally Stunted Emoticon, he had a few objections, right? Divergent plates, dino nests, stuck between layers. So I think that would be the one you're referring to. I actually invited him in to debate you and Neff and myself on the flood tonight, but he hasn't responded. So
where is he? Let him come. Let him come, and I will obliterate him.
I've invited him. I haven't. Well, what's funny is he's usually trolling the chats in our videos, but not tonight.
Well, anyway, what are we gonna review? Which part of the flood you think is not what's the English again? Not explained properly by you or Hovind?
Well, instead of reviewing anything, why don't we discuss it? Hey, Jeremy, why don't you take a few moments and tell the audience, the people that are listening, what do you think is some of the best evidence for the flood? And we'll go from there, and we'll let Neff jump in. Neff's phenomenal on the flood. I've never seen Neff ever lose a debate, because I want to save your actual responses and rebuttals to the atheist, Emotionally Stunted Emoticon, for when we actually get him in here at some point. But let's just talk about flood geology.
Let's talk about theistic evolution, guys. Isn't that so wonderful? Not.
Flood. What? So where are we?
I'm just kidding with you. It was a Christmas joke.
And you know what, Praise? It's like I said earlier. If you look, because your most popular, famous, theistic evolutionary institution is BioLogos, and their arguments are ridiculous. They use all the same overturn arguments. They use the pseudogenes overturned. They use the junk DNA, the chromosome.
They use the DH theory and the gap theory.
Right.
They use whatever.
It's all been refuted. The science it belongs to us, and guess what? We're using genetics, which that's inherited sperm and egg. We can use that to track our history, and it takes us right back to a literal Genesis. It takes us right back to Adam and Eve, Noah's 3 daughters-in-law, and everything, as far as I'm concerned, has been overturned.
Just remember the tail of the dinosaur is really a male's genitalia. Just remember that.
Right. I've heard that from, I think it was Robert from Sentinel Apologetics.
Are you serious? I mean, come on, man.
So the behemoth is described as having a tail like a cedar.
He said, what?
Yeah. So that tail like a cedar, Neff, these theistic evolutionist biblical compromisers, they don't believe that's a tail. They believe, if you go back to a language that they don't understand, it's talking about a bull's or a cow's genitalia or something.
Oh my goodness! Well, I've seen Hugh Ross claim in a debate with Kent Hovind that behemoth was probably a hippopotamus or some such creature, but as though a hippopotamus has a tail like a cedar tree, when it has a tail that's about a foot long and swishes left and right across its spine. I mean, you've got to be kidding me! The logic of these people is just laughable. Really.
Another laughable one is they'll say also, like I've heard, and maybe not Hugh Ross, but no, actually, James Downard in my debate, he said a hippo. A lot of them will say, if you look at these study Bibles that are based on, an evolutionary, starting point, they'll say it's an elephant, and they'll say that little wet noodle of a tail that the elephant has. The cedar tree, it's not the actual cedar tree itself; it's a branch, a little tiny branch on the tree.
It's figurative.
When wind hits it. Well, they're saying that the tail like a cedar is the cedar branch, the little skinny branch.
That's unbelievable. But it says tree. It says swingeth his tail like a tree, not like a branch. But no, it doesn't mean tree. It means branch. Give me a break already.
Well, it conflicts with the worldview. So,
guys.
Yeah. What's that, Jeremy?
Can I be honest,
brother? Honesty is our number one rule here.
You already know this, my friend. I have a soft spot for theistic evolutionists.
Well, I think that's because you were a theistic evolutionist at one point, so that is understandable.
No. That's not the one. Because they're also Christians. So, I mean, I'm not trying to convince you to follow what my soft spot.
Actually,
But,
Jeremy, I think this would be fun. I think this would be fun because you have a soft spot for theistic evolutionists. Let's have a devil's advocate here, okay? Because you know your stuff when it comes to universal common descent. Tell Neff and I. Wait. Tell Neff and I what you because maybe you have a soft spot for them because you believe some of their evidence is a little stronger than some of us other creationists think it is.
No. That's not it. I said
just wait.
The soft spot that I have for them is that they are still Christians like us. Okay, it is the atheist evolutionists which I am targeting. So that's it. That's all. That's I'm being honest. That's all. So if there are theistic evolutionists out there, I am not against you. So
I guess it's kind of like Ken Hovind said in a debate recently. They said, "Can a theistic evolutionist be a Christian and be saved?" And his answer was very short and to the point. He said, "Yes, but they can't be smart." Which, at the end of the day, if they're a theistic evolutionist, they're, for one, rejecting empirical science and rejecting the scriptures. And they're compromising a perfectly good Bible with a theory that has absolutely no evidence for it. So, I mean, it is good to have a soft spot for them. And yes, of course, believing in a young earth creation or rejecting evolution is not a requirement for salvation. But to choose that belief is a rejection of science, and scripture is plain.
And Romans 1.
And Romans 1.
Okay, I think that's settled. So, are we gonna review your debate and Hovid's debate on the flood?
Well, my recommendation is because we've been at this for a while, let's save flood for a separate video, just because I'm sure we can go on for another 2 hours on that. Let's end it with this, okay? Because we did stick to biology and genetics a lot. I think we touched on a lot of good points. Jeremy, what do you think is the number one most convincing or the best evidence that evolutionists have at their disposal? And then let's address that. What do you think is their best evidence?
You want me to tell you the best evidence of evolution against the flood?
No. The best evidence for universal common descent. The best evidence for descent with modification. The belief that
you want me to pretend to be an evolutionist right now?
Yeah, pretend to be an evolutionist and give us, Neff and myself, what you believe is the best evidence for universal common ancestry. And then we can address that evidence, and then we can probably call it a night. What do you think, guys?
That's fine. Yeah.
Yeah, what do you and then me and Neff will give our opinions on that too. So yeah, put yourself in the mindset of an evolutionist.
Are you sure about that? Because it's gonna be very complicated. The flood is much easier. Sure?
Just
you sure you want the audience to hear it?
Well, I think the simplicity of it is just point out what evolutionists
you gotta go
seem to
into
be.
a novel point to whether it's pseudo genes and give a little explanation of that, or if you think it's anatomical and morphological nested hierarchies, point to that. But you don't need to go on a huge rant. But
you just said it. That's their best evidence. You just said it already.
Okay, so I know how I would address that.
But may I add something?
Okay, well, wait. Before you add it, pretend Neff is your opponent here. Give him what you believe is the best evidence. Just a minute explanation, and let Neff address it.
Okay. Let's say human and chimpanzee. Okay. And then, what is closest to chimpanzee today? What is the closest species to chimpanzee today? Monkey? Is it monkey?
No. No, because monkeys evolved before chimpanzees, according to
today.
Wouldn't it be a bonobo? Orangutan?
It would be the orangutan. Yeah.
All right. Okay. So this is. So I'm gonna attack Neff. You mean? I'm gonna attack Neff on this.
Okay, Jeremy, let's make it simple. What is your best evidence that a pine tree and a whale are related through common ancestry? Go ahead.
Best evidence, I got a lot.
Just give one.
For example, like I said, human, and then they say we are very close to chimpanzees, right? And then you guys said that the closest species to chimpanzee is the orangutan, correct? So here's the human, right? God, I really don't wanna say this in public, but this is the human, okay? And this is the chimp, and then this is the orangutan.
Okay.
There is a mutation here,
Yeah.
okay, which, for example, shapes like this. Okay, for just for the audience, there's some mutation.
Okay.
There group of mutation or a hierarchy. Okay, like this for the human alone. Okay,
Yeah.
now this triangle the hell this triangle extends below to the orangutan and the chimpanzee. Okay, so how do you address this hierarchy? Because if those animal kinds were really created separately, then those hierarchies should not exist. The hierarchy should only be contained in human.
Yep.
It can have hierarchy for human. Human can have this, but no extension to orangutan and the chimp.
Okay,
And
I
that's
got you. I got you. There, according to the evolutionists, there is a hierarchy and genetic similarity between early hominids, early apes, and chimpanzees and man, and it's congruent according to their theory. Right. So to fix that, we point out incongruencies in biodivergence and in genetic incongruencies, and the first of these is that. In the apes, monkeys exist in both South America, and in Africa. And the only way that could happen, according to evolutionists, is by biodivergence. That is, that they migrated. They can't have evolved separately, and it's implausible that monkeys evolved in South America, and also evolved in Africa, and they just happen to be nearly so incredibly identical. I mean, there are differences, but a monkey in South Africa is a monkey, and a monkey in Africa is a monkey. So a monkey in South America is a monkey, and a monkey in Africa is a monkey. The idea that they both would evolve to be so incredibly similar is ridiculous. So this points to divergence by rafting after the flood. The animals migrated there. They didn't evolve separately. The problem for the evolution theory is that the continents are separated by so much millions of years of time that the evolutionists are stuck with believing that the monkeys separately evolved in South America and in Africa at the same time. And that's just implausible. Couldn't happen. And the other thing is that genetics shows that man cannot be related to chimpanzees because, for example, the recombination hot swap locations, these are locations of extremely high genetic activity in the genomes of human beings and in chimpanzees. There are hundreds and hundreds of them. They don't align, none of them, between humans and chimpanzees. So because none of the genetic hotspot locations align between chimpanzees and humans is an argument that they can't be related. Because the only way that they could have become swapped around and rotated around to become so divergent as they are would be by chromosomal translocation. And chromosomal translocation produces a disease that is so defective in an organism that it's implausible to believe that hundreds upon hundreds of chromosome translocations or mutations which would completely move a hotspot location to a completely different locus in the DNA would cause a genetic deformity or disease in the organism, like Tay-Sachs disease, Alzheimer's, or what is that disease where people have distorted-looking heads and they have lower intelligence? What is the disease I'm thinking of, guys? I can't think of the name of it. I'm stumped. Oh, shoot. Mongolism, yes. These diseases are the result of that kind of mutation. So, if chimpanzees and humans both, since the common ancestor, experience so many of these translocations of these hotspot locations, between the time that humans and chimpanzees diverged from common ancestor, it would render both species extinct. Natural selection would wipe both of them out because they would have become so deformed, so defunct, mentally and physically, that they would have been wiped out. They would have become extinct. So humans can't be related to chimpanzees because none of the hundreds of genetic recombination hotspot locations in humans and chimpanzee genomes align. Not one of them. So this proves that humans and chimpanzees cannot be related, because to move them all so many times so that none of them would align would constitute a genetic load of humongously destructive mutation that it would have rendered both humans and chimpanzees extinct. So it's impossible for humans and chimpanzees to be related.
Okay, thanks for that response, Nev. We'll go back to you, Jeremy. Since you're pretending to be an evolutionist, how would you respond to that? Do you feel that Nev's answer was sufficient to the evidence you provided? Go ahead, take some time. Take your time, no interruptions, and then we'll go from there.
He said a lot of things, so I wasn't able to keep up with everything. Those are valid points. Are you sure you want me to do this, standing for truth?
Well, I think it would be good to start with his recombinational hotspots, because it looks like Neff looked at the bigger picture and showed why common ancestry between humans and apes is impossible. But I think that genetic related evidence that he presented would need to be addressed, because sure, there's a nested hierarchical a nested hierarchy seen on a DNA level, on a morphological and anatomical level. But at the end of the day, if there's very specific genetic evidences that dispute that ancestry anyways, you'd be looking at the bigger picture and a direct refutation. I mean, yeah, how would you respond, as an evolutionist? But I think that there's certain things that Neff brought up that would need to be addressed as well, or else.
My answer is simple. Neff did not directly Neff Film 3 did not directly address the triangle I was talking about. And this triangle is interconnected with other animals in the world. There is a nested hierarchy. Mutations. So Neff did not directly refute what I just said.
Okay, so my response to that would be that I did address it when it comes to humans and chimpanzees. I refuted the idea that humans and chimps can be related, because the recombination hotspot locations in humans and chimps, none of them align. The only mechanism for their relocation would be grotesque genetic mutations or chromosomal translocations, and that would have rendered both species extinct in 4.5 million years. Also, I would say that incongruencies between species the evolutionists claim are closely related to each other by evolutionary time demonstrate that the species are not related. The evolutionist will tell you only about genetic similarities, which is expected by creationism. Standing for Truth talks about this a lot with his explanation of the created heterozygosity theory. But so the fact that there are tremendous incongruencies and genetic similarities between the species claimed to be so closely related by evolutionists demonstrates that the theory is false, but evolutionists won't discuss that evidence.
Okay. But still, you did not directly. It's okay.
Well, I could give you citations by secular geneticists themselves, which discuss these incredible incongruencies and the fact that they can't figure out why they exist because they should not.
It sounds like Neff is.
And truth is, if evolution were true, there should be no incongruencies at all. None.
So it looks like Neff's pointing out that although it looks like there's a nested hierarchy, there's a lot of inconsistencies with it. There's a lot of incongruities with it, that it's not as neat and nested as some evolutionists might make it out to be. Is that an accurate representation, Neff?
Yeah, yes, it is. But I mean, to go into the details of that, we'd have to spend another 30 minutes.
Right.
And we're not going to spend 30 minutes for me providing the citations from science journals and whatnot.
And that's why they look to, convergent evolution on a bunch of different inconsistencies. Because anytime that they invoke convergent evolution, they're invoking it because there is an inconsistency in the phylogenetic tree of life. But when an evolutionist uses let's say DNA level nested hierarchies, whether they're looking at endogenous retroviruses, pseudogenes, specific genetic markers, patterns in mitochondrial DNA.
Similarity between proteins,
Similarity between proteins, similarities on an amino acid.
That's a big one for them. They love to point to similarity in proteins between one species and another. But that's a failed argument. Because proteins are so specific, right?
And Neff, as you know, they're assuming that those nested hierarchies, whether it's on a protein level, whatever kind of level they're looking at, they're assuming that those nested hierarchies are only evidence for universal common ancestry. But if based on the design model, we predict nested hierarchies anyways, and they're building their phylogenetic trees, their nested hierarchies, on the assumption that all of these DNA differences are the result of mutation. They'll look at specific genetic markers and assume that those are shared genetic mistakes. Are they really mistakes? Are they really, are they actually mutations? Maybe they're a created DNA difference. Why don't we look at function? Function is a good tool.
So consider this one fact. Modern science has discovered that 80% of the proteins in chimpanzees and human beings are different by at least one amino acid, often 3 or more. Okay, so here's the tremendous problem. If evolution were true, 80% of the proteins between humans and chimps should be identical, not similar. They should be identical. The thing is this: proteins are so incredibly specific that a difference in 1 or 3 amino acids in a protein chain that results in a functional protein when it folds results in a completely differently shaped molecule. It does not have exactly the same function. You can change 1 amino acid in a chain of a protein. If you had a sequence of amino acids in the DNA where it says, make this protein by this means, use this amino acid, that one, all for 350, let's see, amino acids. You close your eyes, randomly say, yada, 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 pick an amino acid and swap it out with a different one, odds are that protein will be dysfunctional. Because 1 amino acid can make such a difference in the shape of the folded protein that it completely makes it absolutely dysfunctional. Not always. It depends where in that chain the protein is the amino acid is swapped out. The earlier in that chain that it's swapped out, the less effect it's going to have. The later in that chain, the more dramatic effect in the shape of the protein it's going to have. So a single amino acid difference between a protein between a chimpanzee and a human being can result in a protein having a similar function or no function whatsoever. And according to biologist Hubert Yolkney, who is an expert in his field, he states that one amino acid change, one, can result in a protein being completely dysfunctional and being chewed up by the machinery of the cell and the amino acids used to make new proteins. And that can't be correct if similarity in proteins was evidence that humans and chimps were related.
You don't get it. Really, is devil's advocate the correct English here? Anyway, it doesn't matter. Now, if you don't, good points. If I'm an honest evolutionist, I would say those are good points. But still,
well, consider this: if 80% of the proteins between humans and chimpanzees are different, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Then shouldn't it be
I want to know how Jeremy would address that. How would an evolutionist address that?
I would tell you this if I'm an evolutionist. Like I said, human form a triangle of nested hierarchy based on mutations. Okay, I cannot name the specific mutations. Let's just make it simple for the audience.
Are they assuming mutations, though? Are they assuming that these...
Even if they are functional, it doesn't matter. Here. Let's start from the top of the triangle. 1, 1, 2, 2, 3, 3, 4, 4. You guys get it? Here is number 1. Number 2 is here. Number 3 is here. Number 4 is here. Number 5 is here. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay? Do you know where 6 is?
So let's examine that idea.
At the chimpanzee genome and at the orangutan genome. And it goes to 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, and so on.
Right.
So how do you refute that?
Well, so let's examine that idea according to protein evolution. There are 200,000+ proteins in the human genome and 200,000+ proteins in the chimpanzee genome. For human beings to be so closely related to chimpanzees, then you would expect that the proteins between humans and chimpanzees would very, very largely align. They should be incredibly similar if humans and chimpanzees evolved in such so that they were that they're so closely related. But the problem is, as I pointed out, that changing the amino acid orientation of the proteins of the amino acids in a protein chain can dramatically affect the functionality of the protein or render it completely dysfunctional, where it's no function whatsoever, and the machinery of the cell literally eats it apart. There are machines, believe it or not, in the cell that literally run around like they're hungry machines. They run around with their mouths open and they grab these things and they chew them up and spit them out into pieces. Designed for the purpose of refunctioning amino acids. It's amazing design. So the problem is that if humans and chimpanzees are so closely related, 80% of our proteins should not be different, but should be identical. So if going back in time with the evolution theory, then we get less and less to the 80%, right? Right. So we're going back in time. We get 80%, 60%, 50, 40, 30, 20, 10%. But then we get to humans and chimpanzees and we find 80% of the proteins between humans and chimpanzees are different. The problem is that the evolutionists refuse to acknowledge this simple fact that a difference in the amino acid chain of a protein is a profound difference. They tried to shrug this off as though, that means nothing, that there's a difference. It means everything. And the reason it means everything is because the assignment of the amino acids in the chain that results in the folded structure of a protein is so incredibly specific to result in the final shape of that protein. It is incredibly specific. I mean, it is so specific, GE doesn't make any jet engines that are as specific as the folding of a protein. Let me put it in that perspective. You understand? It's that specific. So that specific shape of a protein must be so exacting that it will interact with another set of proteins, like a set of Lego bricks, so that their shapes match when they encounter each other. They have to be so utterly precise so that they lock into each other and provide a function, right? You can change the amino acid in a chain of a protein by 1 to 3 amino acids, and the end product of the shape of that protein is different enough that when another molecule, another protein designed to fit with it so that it provides function, is not matching into the shape of the one that was mutated enough that the functionality is greatly diminished or non-functional at all, they will not do anything together. And this destroys evolution theory. That is because the specificity of the shape of a protein is so exacting, described by the exact arrangement of amino acids in the gene that codes for that protein is so incredibly specific that it changes the shape of the resulting protein in such a way that in any remarkable difference between them results in the one protein that's designed to interact with it will not do so properly. And that means for humans and chimpanzees to have evolved so that 80% of our proteins are different constitutes a number of disease events in the history of mankind that would be so great that humans and chimpanzees would have gone extinct in less time than they claim, evolutionists claim, that humans and chimpanzees evolved from a common ancestor. Both species would be extinct. You see what I'm saying? Because their biology would degrade so fast by 80% of their proteins changing in the shape. Both species would have gone extinct because their biology would be so degraded they would be absolutely extinct. And let me give you one example from my own personal life. I'm hypoglycemic. I'm hypoglycemic because a change, genetic mutation occurred in my body that changed the shape of a specific protein that makes my body incapable of one protein in my body able to utilize the energy that I use in my cells efficiently as it should have, and it did 25, 30 years ago. Now, what that means is, if that's just one mutation, if humankind experienced over 100,000 years 10,000 such mutations, they would go extinct because they couldn't even live. That'd be it for us. So humans and chimps can't be related to each other because the 80% of our proteins are different by at least one amino acid. And to have that many changes to the codes for the proteins in the human being and the chimpanzee, both species would have gone completely extinct because their biology would have degraded to the point that they would be unfit for survival, and natural selection would have wiped them out.
I would refute everything you said, but what you said are good points. I can refute them one by one, but still you did not address my central claims, and I'm gonna further enhance my central claims on the triangle. Because
No, hey, Jeremy, I just want to stop you there. You said you could refute them all one by one. He did bring up a
No,
lot of
no, no.
really
I
good.
want to. I want to go. I want to
No,
go
no, just wait,
directly
just wait,
to
just wait,
the
just wait. No,
triangle.
I want to make a valid point. You said that you could refute them all. Just take one then, because just to say I can refute them all, I don't think that that's fair. If you can refute them all, then surely you can just pick one that he said and refute it. Then go on to your, because technically, if this was because you're pretending to be the evolutionist, he's a creationist. He brought up a lot of good points. If you were to just say what you just said in an actual debate, it wouldn't look good.
No.
So just
He
take
never
one of the
addressed my
things you said
central
and refute it
claims.
then.
He never addressed my central claims. Do you want me to enhance my central claims?
Well, your central claim is that there's a shared mutation hierarchy. There's a shared hierarchy of mutations.
No. There's more. You want me to go more?
But let's understand your argument. You're trying to say that there's a hierarchy. Okay,
It's more than that.
Humans,
It's more than that.
chimpanzees, orangutan. Let's understand your argument so far. So you've got humans, chimpanzees, orangutans. You can go all the way down to bonobos, and you can go to monkeys.
Yes.
You can go to lemurs. You're saying that there's a shared hierarchy of mutations right from those species.
And those mutations are identical. And their amino acids or proteins, most of them are also identical.
Yeah, but Neff just refuted that by showing you that the 80% in proteins is actually different. Isn't that right, Neff?
Yes, according to secular geneticists, 80% of the proteins
identical.
in humans and chimpanzees are different by at least one amino acid, often many.
Okay, so how is that?
But
How is that a perfect hierarchy of mutations then?
But why is this hierarchy? Okay, it doesn't only go this way, like you
There are
said.
inconsistencies in the hierarchy,
It
though.
doesn't only go this way. It doesn't only go this way, like you said. Okay, it goes.
It does because of this.
Well, Neff, I just want to make a quick point, okay?
There's another direction to that. I don't know if you're getting. I think you're not getting my point here. I already said there's 1, 1, 2, 2, 3, 3, and there's more.
I understand that. But in these DNA positions, there's shared mutations across these species. You can take it all the way down to dogs. You can take it down to plants, whales. But here's the thing, okay? If as creationists we predict nested hierarchies anyways on a DNA level, on an anatomical and a morphological level based on the design model. Because if God created us in his image, well, we can get a sense for his design based on the designs we look at, right? So we know modes of transportation do naturally fall within a nested hierarchy. Now, here's what I want to say. We can take that hierarchy as far as, say, sedans. Just wait. We can look at sedans. They all share features. All sedans are incredibly similar. You can bring in SUVs, vans. There's a hierarchy there. Now you can even go as far as planes, which you can even find similarities in planes that are in sedans that share hierarchies. For example, you can even look down at a molecular level almost. You can look at the materials used, right? The steels, the aluminum. They're on airplanes, for example, the aluminum, it's strong, it's lightweight metal. You can look at the tires, right? You can look at the car tires, and the airplane tires are very similar. You can even build a hierarchy if you wanted to.
It goes beyond that.
And cars. It's just these relative hierarchies are evidence of design. Now, one last thing, if we both predict hierarchies, okay, now we got to look outside of the box. We got to look at something that's going to be able to differentiate between the models, and that's where Neff is pointing out these various lines of genetic evidence that shows chimpanzees and humans cannot be related. Therefore, the hierarchies, yeah, we both predict it. But now let's look at the other levels of evidence that refute universal common ancestry.
It also points out that creation expects genetic similarity. This is something that evolutionists refuse to acknowledge, but it's true. Genetic similarity is between phyla or even families in genus are expected if creation is true. Because, for example, if God created creatures that have limbs, well, shouldn't we expect genetic similarity because this creature and that creature have limbs? Well, that's true. The problem is that the evolutionist refuses to understand or acknowledge that the differences between those genetics that create the limbs in, say, a fish and a land-dwelling creature are so profound. They make so much a difference. It comes down to what's called the myth of the 1%. Look this up on the internet. The myth of the 1%. You'll find numerous creationist scientists discuss it. So the idea is this. There can be all kinds of genetic similarity between different types of life in different families or genus of life. But the differences between them are maybe relatively small, but they can be so profound in what they mean. For example, if you have 100 million base pairs of genetic information, and you have the same 100 million base pairs of genetic information in a different species, they may largely line up. Let's imagine just 1,000 base pairs are different between the two. The difference in information of those 1,000 base pairs is so profound that it can result in a completely different structural design in the one species and the other. Just 1,000 out of 1 million can make such an incredible difference. And so the idea that genetic similarity, it does seem logical to the evolutionists. They see the logic behind it. Similarity, obviously relatedness, and that's all well and good. And there's truth in that, logically, right? But what they're ignoring, what they may not be aware of, is that the difference, though it may be relatively small in comparison to how much similarity there is, makes a profound difference in the structural design of the organism. So you could have 100 million base pairs exceedingly similar between two families of life, and there might be only 1,000 base pairs difference between those two giant stretches of DNA. And that 1,000 base pairs makes such an incredible difference in the structural design of those two species that verifies it's illogical to believe that mutation could create those structural designs to change 1,000 base pairs to make them so that they're related. How does that work? How does random mutations take 100 million base pairs and change 1,000 of them, and then completely change the anatomy of the animal, make new and completely new bones, new tendons, new muscles, new sinews, new snout bones or roofing bones come into existence because of the change of 1,000 base pairs? It doesn't add up. The evolutionist idea of genetic similarity is based on a paradigm and not the actual scientific evidence.
What about the codons? They're also passed.
I got to take a break. I'll be back in about 2 minutes. Sorry.
Breaking news, guys. Santa Claus is on his sleigh.
Oh, my kids are excited, Praise. So you know what? I want to say one thing. I want to give Jeremy the floor here. This has been a really good discussion. I feel like we've really, really given the knockout punch to evolution. We've even gone back and forth here on their so-called best evidence for evolution. So we've touched all bases. I want to hand it over to Jeremy, give his thoughts. But Jeremy, this is a question I'd like you to answer. If you don't feel comfortable, you're tired, you don't have to, of course. We've had a long night. It's been a lot of fun. But forgetting everything Neff and I just said on how we would refute DNA level nested hierarchies anatomically and morphologically, hypothetically, let's say an evolutionist like Dr. Herman Mays used that on you. Okay, let's say he looked at amino acids or third position codon, degenerate codons, and built nested hierarchies there. How would you respond? You know, what would be your rebuttal to such an argument? And take as much time as you need there, Jeremy.
You already addressed that. The Sudan and the airplane. That would be my answer too. It's as simple as that.
So,
and one more thing. The proteins unchanging, he said in the debates. No, proteins do change. We have to study more. He is assuming those proteins that he is saying don't change.
I'm not
I'm changing.
assuming anything.
Oh no, Neff. He's talking about an evolutionist, Herman Mays.
So we are one step towards debunking him. The proteins that he said,
Who, Herman Mays?
which are unchanging, we observe proteins, other proteins that change.
You're talking about the neutral variation?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, that's a problem too. The idea of neutrality.
Well, and he assumes that they are neutral. He assumes function can't explain it. And like Jeremy just reiterated, you can literally build hierarchies in modes of transportations down to something as far dissimilar as cars and airplanes. I mean, they're going to share hierarchies based on materials, metals, tires. I mean, just like, and that's why Aron Ra's phylogeny challenge, it's fallacious because we both predict nested hierarchies. I mean, you can look at, you can find nested hierarchies in any form of life. That you can look at pigs, ducks, and dogs. You're going to find nested hierarchies because they're all land dwelling.
Right.
It doesn't mean that they're related. So when he looks for a breakdown in the phylogeny, he's asking for something that we wouldn't predict.
Right, and the problem with evolutionists is that they believe everything has such great plasticity in genetics that it can migrate, it can move, it can translocate. It's all good. It can happen just any which way. But the problem is that modern science has demonstrated that genetics information is so utterly, incredibly specific.
One more
Now,
thing about
the problem, the only thing becomes...
Just one second, because I want to, I just because I feel like me and you've been talking.
I think we ought to move on to something else, actually. I think we've burned this down.
Yeah, let's do this, because I know, Jeremy, you wanted to say one thing. It is getting late. I got to be up really, really early with the kids. Maybe we can, I'd like for us to set up one of these again soon enough, where maybe we can touch on other things, right? Get into geology, flood geology. If you want to say one last thing, Jeremy, and then we'll kind of wind it down.
The protein against Mays, that's one. And then another one. He also talked about the redundancy of those codons and what is that other one again? I forgot, sorry. The redundancy is not enough. If evolution is true, there should be a lot more of those redundancies. Okay? Okay, millions of years, a lot of...
And this is how you would address, and that is how you would address the argument you're saying, right?
And there's more. You, standing for truth, refuted it using simple data. Now, mine is technical, a little more technical, but also somewhat simple. But we can go deeper, even further, okay? Plus, function. That's what Dr. Nathaniel Jeanson said. This is the third refutation against that Mays evidence, okay? Function. If these are functional, I'm not saying they are functional now, okay? But we have not studied. We are still at the infancy of DNA today, okay? Many things that they thought the DNA does before or does not, especially the DNA does not do, turn out to be doing something. Protein moonlighting, standing for truth, did mention that a lot. And that is a super shock to evolutionists. Because protein moonlighting works like a Swiss knife. Hello?
Standing for Truth got disconnected.
So, are we done?
Yeah, probably should, because it's getting late.
Where is standing for truth? He's gone.
I think he said his computer got turned off on him.
Okay. So, good job, Neff. Is Neff still there?
I don't even know if he is either.
I
Yeah,
think
he
it's
is.
Yeah, good job, Jeremy, for providing arguments from the evolutionist camp against creation.
and good job refuting it. And I also tried to refute the all important Herman Mays argument, which they say is an incredible evidence for evolution. I gave
Right.
3. I can even
Yeah.
give a 4th one.
Yeah, I think we made a good case, that creation, between you and me, that creation is correct and the evolutionist idea is false. So good job for hanging in there with that. Yep. Looks like that worked out.
So I'm really tired. I mean, it's Christmas. I
Yeah,
didn't sleep.
we're going to call it quits, guys.
Yeah.
Okay. I'm out of here. You guys have
Yeah.
a good
It was a
evening.
pleasure.
Bye.
Merry Christmas to everyone in the chat, and thanks for coming in and watching
Merry
tonight.
Christmas.
Nice to
Jesus,
meet you, Praise.
Nice to meet you too, Jeremy. Great job.
Jesus Christ is Lord and Creator. Let's not forget it. God bless
Okay.
everybody. Have a good evening.
Amen.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. So how do I close this? Just
Yeah.
just the X, because
Yeah.
this is a new type. Because the last time I had this was
You can either just hit in the
I
right
have to-
corner or just either one, or just the minus button.
okay. See. Thank you.
Yep. Likewise.